What if I told you that sometimes life doesn't actually begin when we're young? That's a strange thing to say, right? Because most of us are conditioned to believe that our 20s are the golden years. That's when we're full of energy, chasing dreams, hustling, trying to prove ourselves. Our 30s, that's when we build, when we settle down, when we tick the boxes of what society tells us is success: career, family, house, car. But what if the truth is this? You can run through all of those stages and still feel like you haven't even started living. And then suddenly, you hit 40. You pause, you look around, and it finally dawns on you, wait, I've been postponing myself all this time. That's why the title of this video is My Life Began at 40. Not because turning 40 magically makes life better, but because for so many of us, it takes that long to realize that the life we were living wasn't really ours. It was borrowed. It was scripted. It was following expectations that maybe never belonged to us in the first place. And when you wake up to that reality, when you finally stop postponing yourself, that's when life truly begins. I want you to imagine this with me. Think back to your 20s. Remember that fire you had? That sense that you could take on the world? You probably had big dreams, maybe to build something of your own, to travel, to love deeply, to succeed on your own terms. But then life started to pile on layers: responsibility, fear, bills, doubts. Suddenly those dreams got pushed aside. I'll do it later, you told yourself, when things are more stable, when I have more money, when I've figured it all out. But later kept getting further away. And then your 30s came. And for many people, this decade is survival mode. You're providing for your family, working long hours, trying to maintain the lifestyle you think you're supposed to have, but inside, something starts to feel empty. You look in the mirror and ask, is this it? Is this really what life is all about? Then 40 arrives. And for a lot of people, that's when it hits. You realize the runway of time isn't endless. You realize you've been postponing yourself, waiting for some perfect moment to start living your truth. And in that realization, something shifts. It's almost like being born again. Not in the sense of starting from zero, but in finally choosing yourself. Finally saying, no more delay, no more postponement, I begin now. That's why when I say my life began at 40, I don't just mean age. I mean the awareness, the awakening, the decision to stop living for other people's timelines and to finally step into who you really are. And here's the surprising part. This message isn't only for those in their 40s. If you're listening right now in your 20s or 30s, this might be the wake-up call you need before decades slip by. Because what I've discovered is that life doesn't begin at a certain age. Life begins at the moment you stop postponing yourself. But for me, and for so many others, that moment happened at 40. That was the turning point, the line in the sand, the new chapter where I finally took ownership of my story. So in this video, I want to share with you what that awakening feels like, what it means to stop postponing yourself, and why 40 isn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a whole new one. Because maybe, just maybe, you don't need to wait until you hit that milestone. Maybe today could be the day your life really begins. When I finally hit 40, it felt like standing in front of a mirror that refused to lie anymore. I could see everything clearly. The years of chasing, the endless pursuit of things that, if I'm honest, never really mattered as much as I thought they would. The car, the house, the validation of people who probably weren't even thinking about me. For so long, those things were the scoreboard of my life. And then suddenly it hit me. I'd been keeping score in the wrong game. There's this phrase I once heard, we all live two lives. The second begins when we realize we only have one left. That's exactly what 40 felt like. A sobering but liberating realization that time isn't infinite, and that waiting for someday is a dangerous trap. Because someday never arrives. It's either today, or it's nothing. People often call this a midlife crisis. But I don't see it that way anymore. A crisis sounds like the end, like a breakdown. For me, it was actually a breakthrough. It was less of a collapse and more of an awakening. A shaking of the shoulders that said, wake up, stop postponing yourself. You've been living on autopilot, chasing shadows. Now is the moment to actually live. That awareness changed everything. I started to see the emptiness behind the illusions I had been sold. The idea that happiness was in the next purchase, the next title, the next compliment. But none of those ever filled the void, because none of them addressed the real issue. I had never truly chosen myself. I had been running on programs, cultural expectations, family traditions, society's definition of success. At 40, all of that started to crack. And instead of clinging to it, I decided to see it for what it really was. A gift. Because when the illusions fall apart, you're finally free to build on truth. That's why I don't call it a midlife crisis. I call it a midlife awakening. It was the day my first life ended, the life of trying to be who I thought I should be, and my second life began, the life of choosing who I truly am. And if you've ever felt that same disillusionment, that sense of, is this all there is? I want you to know you're not broken. You're awakening. And sometimes, that's exactly what it takes before real life begins. When I hit 40, I thought I was supposed to feel secure, confident, accomplished. Isn't that what society tells us? That by this age, you should have the career figured out, the family stable, the house, the car, the life all lined up neatly like a checklist. And in many ways, I had those things, or at least the image of them. But when I sat with myself in silence, I realized something terrifying. I had built a life that looked full on the outside, but felt empty on the inside. It was as if I had been running on a treadmill for 20 years, sweating, straining, moving, but staying in the exact same spot. I had been chasing illusions, pouring my energy into things that never satisfied. The newest gadget, the approval of others, the sense that if I just achieved one more milestone, then I would finally feel enough. But every time I got there, the finish line moved. That's what hitting 40 felt like for me. A brutal honesty check. The mirror no longer lied. And I had to admit it. I had been postponing myself, postponing my purpose, postponing my real life. There's a line from the writer Richard Rohr that struck me. Transformation often comes not with success, but with suffering and failure. And that's the strange gift of reaching the wall at 40. It wasn't fun, but it was clarifying. The suffering peeled away the lies. It stripped me down to what was real. It was also here that I remembered something Myron Golden said that shook me awake. 10 years will pass whether you do the thing or not, so why postpone it? Just do it anyway. That hit me like a hammer to the chest. I thought of all the times I told myself later, someday, when I'm ready. But later never came. A whole decade had already passed in the blink of an eye, and if I didn't change, another decade would vanish the same way. That was my two lives moment, the realization that my second life could only begin when I accepted that I had just this one. Not a rehearsal, not a test run. This was it. But here's the part I want you to hear clearly. This wasn't a midlife crisis. People call it that because they see the symptoms, the dissatisfaction, the questioning, the shift. But I see it now as a midlife awakening, because in that disillusionment, I found freedom. The moment I stopped being intoxicated by the illusion of someday, I was free to live in the truth of today. It's almost funny when you think about it. We spend our youth desperate to grow up. We spend our 20s trying to prove ourselves. We spend our 30s trying to maintain the image. And then 40 comes along and whispers, stop, breathe, you're allowed to begin again. And maybe that's what wisdom really is. Not accumulating more, but finally recognizing what doesn't matter and letting it go. The car won't love you back. The house won't fill the hole in your chest. The applause won't silence your doubts, because the problem was never outside of me. The problem was the postponement inside of me. At 40, that veil lifted. And yes, it was painful. Yes, it felt like loss. But in reality, it was gain. Because when the illusions fall away, what's left is you. The raw, authentic you, the one you've been postponing, and that's the version of you God has been waiting for all along. So when I say my life began at 40, I mean that was the moment the false life ended. That was the day I finally stopped postponing myself. That was the shift from living a story I inherited to writing the story I was born for. And if you're watching this, I want you to know, you don't have to wait for 40. You don't have to wait for a crisis, a breakdown, a loss, or a birthday milestone. 10 years will pass no matter what. So the real question is, will you use those years building the life that's yours, or wasting them postponing it? That's the challenge I faced. That's the challenge I give you. Because postponement is the thief of destiny. But awakening is the beginning of everything. Postponement was the silent thief of my life. It wasn't failure that held me back. It wasn't even lack of opportunity. It was the constant whisper, not yet, later, when you're ready, when things calm down, when you have more money, when you have more time. But here's the raw truth. Later is a lie. Later is a thief. Later steals more dreams than failure ever could. Because failure at least moves you forward. Later keeps you frozen. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself you'll start tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll eat healthier. Tomorrow you'll take that first step toward your dream. Tomorrow you'll write the book, launch the business, mend the relationship. But tomorrow never comes. You wake up, and it's today again. And then you say, I'll do it tomorrow. Years slip by, and nothing changes. That's why Myron Golden's words pierced me so deeply. 10 years will pass whether you do the thing or not. So why postpone it? Just do it anyway. Imagine the weight of that. 10 years ago feels like yesterday. 10 years from now will come whether you act or not. So the question isn't whether time will move. The question is whether you'll move with it. And this is where the awakening at 40 flipped the script for me. Instead of seeing time as my enemy, something slipping away, I began to see it as my opportunity. God didn't give me another day to waste. He gave me another day to invest. And every day I postponed was an investment in nothing. Here's where the Bible spoke straight to my heart. James 4:14 says, "What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." That verse used to depress me. But now I see it as urgency. If my life is a mist, I don't have the luxury to keep postponing. I have to pour everything into the days I've been given. The truth is, postponement is just fear in disguise. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. We wrap it in excuses. I'm too busy, I'm not ready, I need more information. But underneath it all, it's fear. And fear grows stronger the longer you feed it with delay. The opposite of postponement is obedience. Obedience to the nudge God places on your heart. Obedience to the vision He's shown you. Obedience to your purpose. And here's what I learned the hard way. Obedience now is always better than perfect later. Because later never arrives. When I finally stopped postponing, my life accelerated. Not because everything magically aligned, but because I aligned myself with action. I remember when I first took my small business online. For years, I told myself I wasn't ready. I didn't know enough about tech, marketing, or sales. But the day I stopped postponing and simply obeyed the pull to try, doors opened. Customers appeared. Growth began. It wasn't perfect, but perfection was never the requirement. Action was. That's the lesson I want you to hear. Stop postponing yourself. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission. Stop waiting for the fear to disappear. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions. They don't exist. If God placed a seed inside of you, He expects you to plant it now, not later. Because delay kills dreams. I look back now and see how much time I wasted postponing, and it hurts. But I also see how powerful it was the moment I stopped. That's when my second life truly began. And I promise you this, the same can happen for you. So let me ask you, what have you been postponing? That book, that business, that conversation, that act of faith? 10 years will pass either way. Don't wake up a decade from now wishing you had started today. Because once you break free from postponement, everything changes. Your time multiplies, your growth accelerates, your spirit aligns with your purpose, and you finally stop living someone else's story and start living your own. That's the awakening. That's the power of refusing to postpone yourself any longer.